these recordings. Somebody told me that during the last recording, she caught me like making strange faces. She was describing them to me. I was like, I didn't know anybody was watching, and certainly forgot that I was being recorded. But here we are.
She didn't know you were born that way?
Right. So this is technically the final week of public comment on the open referral model. And we've gotten a lot of good comments. We've been going back and forth on just really a few issues. And we can talk about some of that here, but we also have a sense of, we're at the point where we're ready to think about what comes next. So I will actually be sharing here we go, the notes document. I'm pasting there into the sidebar. And you can all jump on in there and get a sense of what others are saying. So let's go around and just introduce ourselves real quick, and then we can review the agenda. Chris, go ahead. Oh yeah, Dale, go ahead. Get us started.
Okay. I'm Dale Fitch. I'm a professor of social work at the University of Missouri School of Social Work, and been a social worker for 24 years now. And since moving to academia, I do research on information systems in human services agencies, and information and referral is a huge piece of that. So that's my interest and why I'm here.
Thanks, Dale.
This is Chris. Hello.
Yep.
This is Chris from Alameda County, and Alameda County is a county that consists of very large cities like Oakland and Berkeley and Hayward, out in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. I am a evaluation and technology administrator at First 5 Alameda County. Our dollars are coming from tobacco taxes to fund programs to support families with young kids in the 0 to 5 years old range. So my interest in information referrals is actually stemming from a lot of our programs, accountability frameworks that look at how our case managers and family support staff connect families with resources around the county, and whether they were successful in connecting them, and if not, for what reasons. So that's the primary purpose of why I'm involved in this particular program. We're also a major funder of a program called Help Me Grow, which is a national initiative, but we work on the county level, which is working with families whose kids may have developmental concerns. So a large part of that project is actually working with families to navigate them to the right resources that could help their kids early on.
Great. Sophia. Did we lose Sophia?
Yep, I'm here. So I'm Sophia Parafina. I work on the specification itself, and basically I collect a lot of the information that everybody's providing and try to shuffle it into some sort of rational document that we can move forward on.
Great. Cool. So we may still be joined by a few others. Haven't been hearing from anybody that they're having trouble getting in, but we should not wait. So far I've gotten a sense of a few things that people are interested in talking about. Sophia brought up the issue of eligibility as one of the remaining items that we sort of have yet to really come to a clear sense of how we want to nail that down in the spec. And Dale asked about how we will be monitoring pilot's progress and evaluating how some of these things play out. In terms of our assumptions made in the spec, how we will test those assumptions. And then Chris also was asking about some more details on the particular approaches that each pilot project is taking. Why don't we I would actually like to try to thread all three of these topics together. The question of eligibility, the question of how we're making assumptions in the spec and how we expect to test those assumptions, and monitor the pilot's progress, and then also like the questions of what the pilots are actually doing. So I would propose this, given what people have asked for. I can share a little bit of an update on DC, and/or if Jen is able to jump on the call. She seems to be having trouble with Wi-Fi. She'll be able to share a little bit about what we're doing. And then maybe we can hear a little bit from Chris about what you all have been talking about, and think in those contexts about the stakeholders who are at the table, what their different approach to, say, the issue of eligibility, how they currently structure that in their systems, and how, given the plans for action that they want to take, what kind of needs for a model do they have, and how are we going to take a best guess and then check those assumptions through the course of the project. What do y'all think? Any clarifying questions or suggestions or additions?
I think that sounds pretty good to me.
Sounds good.
Cool. So I'll go first, and I'll talk a little bit about DC. We really have two primary leads in DC, and a broad network of organizations that I think are watching closely and are ready to follow. One lead is Bread for the City, which is the organization I worked at where I learned about this stuff for the first time, and they maintain one of the best resource directories in the city, pretty much just for internal purposes, although they're happy to share it. But they use it for their intakes, and they do about 30,000 intakes a year. They have about 1,500 services in an access database that they maintain. And while it's probably not up to the level of quality that one would expect from a 2-on-1 or a vendor, it's certainly good enough for them, and it's trusted enough in the community that people come to them for referrals elsewhere, and other organizations come to them to get this data. They keep their own set of criteria in terms of eligibility, mostly based in just notes fields. And I think Jen can speak a little bit more to that because she's been doing the in-depth research. So hopefully she'll come on and we can get back into the details on that. But the idea, our plan for this piece of the DC pilot is to take Bread for the City's current database, transform it into the open referral format, load it into Ohana, the Code for America prototype platform, and replicate the first step is simply to replicate their current ability to search their own database from within their Salesforce case management system. Here's Jen, so she can talk a little bit more about that. Hi, Jen. And so once we've got Bread's data up in Ohana in this cloud platform, then we're simply going to build a simple search interface first in their Salesforce case management system, so that they're still able to do what they currently do, but now that data is available in the standard format in a platform that others could also access. So that's one piece of the DC pilot in the near term. And then the other piece of the DC pilot is that the city government has committed to providing all city services as a first step, and then we hope next year all city contracted services through their 2-on-1 system, which they operate, which is on iCarol, who's also in our group. And so iCarol is going to be redeveloping its API to speak the same language that Ohana is speaking, essentially, so that DC government is publishing city services and then city contracted services over here, and Bread for the City is keeping track of community services, and that's available in Ohana over there. And then next year, our plan is then to start working with other organizations to get them to start consuming data from each of these sources, and also pushing their own updates to Ohana or developing their own API that speaks their own language. First, does that all make sense to you all? Do you have questions about that? And we can ask Jen for, first of all, an introduction and maybe a little bit more detail on what she's been hearing from Brett.
Hi, you all. I'm Jen. I'm the organizer in DC. I jumped on in the middle. Were you just giving them an overview of what we're doing at Redford City? Not any of the questions, or just about what we're trying to do in the near term?
Yeah, the agenda, and you can check out the notes document. The agenda is, generally speaking, we want to get a sense of how we're testing the assumptions of this model and how we'll be evaluating the model, implementing and evaluating it. And specifically, Sophia is interested in thinking through the eligibility piece of that. And you and Chris are both on the line, can speak to each of our pilots. So we're talking about what's going to happen in the pilots and then working our way towards how does that play out with what decisions we make in the model now, and how we will then evaluate those decisions moving forward.
So Bread for the City, the social workers there, as well as the analysts there, took a look at the model. And did you all talk about the eligibility and where they see warm referrals, Greg?
Not yet.
Okay.
So yeah, you can.
So Bread for the City and other organizations have what they like to call a warm referral, which is basically a signed paper that a client has, and they need that piece of paper in order to receive a service. And so one thing that the social workers were saying is that they were trying to figure out where they see the warm referral being. And they don't think it should be an eligibility requirements, just because different organizations have different eligibilities that go outside of just the warm referral. I'm trying to explain it in a way that they could. They see the warm referral being placed in the application process. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Sophia. So basically, someone could receive like a referral, a warm referral, but not meet the organization's eligibility criteria and vice versa. And so that's why they thought it should be an application process. But yeah, so I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that.
And the use case there was very specifically they wanted to be able to search.
Yeah, they want to be able to query services that do not require a warm referral. That's very important to them.
And also to be able to know whether the service that they're looking at, they want to be able to flag whether that's a requirement and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I have no particular, recommendations for that. I mean, essentially, that's one use case, and it's something that probably is something that should be worked out in terms of the business rules of an application, rather than at this level that I'm dealing with, which is just the data itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could flag certain things so that, they need a warm referral, but again, I think that's more of an application thing rather than a data thing.
Mm-hmm.
In Alameda County, we struggle with a couple of things, and that is the point of entry into any resource, community resource out there could range. And one is, what we struggle with is we have a lot of programs out there that actually provide services only if they were directly enrolled by particular individuals in the community, and there's no other way into this particular resource. So, but at the same time, the enrolling entities are we contract with, and we would ultimately like them to whatever system is available to them to enroll people into the community resource. So I think we see different types of users in that. And just wondering which items to publish to the general public, or is it also limited to their user accounts, or, anyway, we do have, I would say, 3 or 4 different types of points of entry into any community resource, and not sure how that's handled.
Greg, if I could offer 2 cents.
Sure.
I think it would get back to what Sophia was talking about. That would be a business rule. So depending upon the user credentials, some things may not show up. However, if you're a case manager, other items would show up. Or it could be that you enter in the services that you need, and if you need a warm referral, the result would tell you to contact the appropriate agency in order to be connected with those services. But again, like Sophia said, that would be a business rule and not necessarily related to the each specific eligibility criteria. Sophia, is that what you were thinking as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more of, it's to each individual, people who implement this, it's at that level. It really, for us, or at least for what I do, or it's not so much at the data level, that this is something that should be at the application level and built into the business rules, because everybody's going to have some way that's different, and then trying to, have that at that level, I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like you could have it, but it would be such an optional field, and it probably won't be used a lot. So, I mean, my feeling is that optional fields just tend not to be populated and tend not to be used a lot.
And so, I'm just trying to get a sense of, like, when we're talking to Bread for the City, and they're like, okay, this is an important use case to us, and so we say, okay, you can set this up in your system. There's a field for application process. Is warm referral a specified type within that field, or are there multiple fields within application process that they can develop in their system? For those of us who are working with people who don't necessarily have this frame of reference of a data model and then an application with its own business rules, how do we help think this through? I guess this is analogous to Chris's situation, where the application process very well may be, directing to another record in terms of who to call and what their hours of operation are and this and that.
Yeah, that's how you described it. That's how I would understand it.
Mm-hmm. And so is that the case, that this is a field, but there can be fields within that field? Is that the idea, Sophia? Sorry for the sort of non-technical question here.
We could handle it that way, but like I said, it's to me it seems to be more at the application level that this particular use case should be solved at, rather than at the data level.
Yeah, Greg, if I were to understand, it wouldn't be necessarily a separate field, but simply a certain combination of fields, recognizing whoever is trying to access a service. So if you have a certain combination of fields and it's somebody from the public trying to access the services, then that combination of fields, which would be a business rule, would direct the user to the gatekeeper agency that would make the warm referral. However, based upon the person's login, if they are a case manager, then it would take them directly to the services.
Okay. So it's a combination of both fields and also the type of user, potentially. Mm-hmm. Chris, do you have a follow-up question on that, or Jen? Do you have a sense of? Do you want more clarification on this piece?
I think I got it down pat. Sophia, you were saying that things like eligibility requirements and whether or not you can query that or know if something requires a warm referral is more a business issue, an application issue, than a data issue. And that it's up to each organization, I suppose, to implement those things.
Yeah, it'd be the implementing organization.
Okay.
I think I got that. I think that it's good for me to just hear what are the various options are. We certainly, in our other case management systems, do control a lot of things based on user profile. And I guess if we could think about whether this is a universal need to identify whether a resource is an open resource or a closed resource with sort of limited points of entry, it's something for us to consider in terms of some of these more global specifications. But I totally get it. There are a lot of things we could control through our applications.
Mhm.
And we also, briefly on this, and then I want to see if Dale or Sophie have any other thoughts. We did identify in the workshop the potential need for another user type, Chris, specifically being the organization to which a referral is being made. That was not a user type that we had going into the workshop, and it sort of emerged for considerations like this, in which you have either a closed resource or a resource that really has information that, for privacy reasons, should be kept hidden. That setting up the ability for organizations to indicate that is important. We may not address it in this point in time in the model, but I guess this brings us back to Dale's question and of how we will be evaluating the model, knowing that we're not addressing everything, knowing that we're making certain assumptions. How are the pilots going to be able to act to accomplish whatever it is they need to be able to do to meet their needs in a way that we then learn what should happen in the future, in a future iteration. So Dale, Sophia, thoughts on that, and/or closing up on this particular issue? Because I'm eager to hear more from Chris about the San Francisco Bay pilot. Go ahead, Dale or Sophia.
No, nothing specific to add. The only caution is that with however the initial model is structured, we want to make sure that it's still flexible and adaptable enough that if we discover something 9 months down the road, it won't break the whole system. And but I'm sure Sophia has done that. Dozens of, not broken systems. I'm sure Sophia has designed systems such that you can add on new features and things. But this has been my experience that with some vendors, you add on a new feature, and it fundamentally breaks their data model, and they're like, "Well, we'll have to start all over again." So that would just be my concern.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I think that one of the things that's more difficult that what we've done in terms of moving to a technology that is more popularly used, such as a relational database, is that changing that schema becomes more difficult if we try to add extended data types. Granted, that sort of this balance between between known reliable technology that most people most people have familiarity with versus technology that's based on NoSQL, where you can essentially run without a particular database schema, and that you can just work with documents on the fly. So, I mean, again, like I said, to me it seems like a lot of this stuff should be out of the data model and out of the data, and it should be pretty much into the business rules part of it. I'm not exactly sure how the implementation would go. We'd have to look at, at it a case-by-case basis, really, when it comes down to it. I mean, we've moved the technology back to something that most people can handle, that most people can find somebody to work with, but, that's sort of our trade-off. It's like we've got a little bit more constraints with more commonly used technology versus fewer constraints with technology that fewer people have experience with.
And I think this points to some of the tension that we've had in conversations with some of the other folks, most of whom are not on this call, but who are calling for specifications in XML, calling for the development of a logical model. People who are I think my perspective on that is that they're used to working with enterprise level systems, and I think they're thinking on that level. whereas we're recognizing that actually a lot of the vast majority of the people who are collecting this information are not using systems that are using XML. They're using, say, access databases and so on and so forth. And our question is not necessarily, to go one way versus the other, but to figure out how to effectively balance between the two. So
I think one way to do that balance then is, well, maybe not necessarily the balance, but I think what Sophia was referring to is that so far nobody has identified any new data elements. Everything that's been talked about for the most part has been business rules applied to those data elements. So that could be an indicator that it's time to go ahead and move forward with some of the implementations, and that nobody so far has identified any new data elements that need to be added.
Except for maybe the question of the organization to whom a referral is being made, which I think was something Chris was bringing up, like elements that sort of address their status or their ability to say this is actually the part of our information that should be public and under what circumstances. Sophia, do you want to speak to that? Is that something that is currently accounted for, or is a business rule, or something that we should consider to account for in the future? Is it one of those potential model breakers?
Everybody does everything a little bit differently, and I don't think it's something that's a particular model breaker. It's just people either accept the model or they don't, or we work with some sort of compromise in between in terms of when you get to deployment. So at some point we draw a line in the sand and say this is where it's at. We'll have to do, if you want to do this, we'll have to be clever and figure it out how to do it within the business rules. It's just like we've gotten to this point where we can't please everyone. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that we can't find a solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then Chris, I'm eager to hear about the San Francisco pilot, but first I want to pause and say, given this, what we've heard here and the sort of delicate balance that we have to strike, nuts and bolts wise, how are we sending these folks into the field with this model? What kind of feedback are they trying to collect? In what format? How will we, do you have thoughts on how we'll review it? We're not trying to figure this all out here, but identifying the questions and suggestions or precedents during these conversations can help us sort of go forth into those local conversations and chart a path.
So my experience has been more limited to just what First Five has been exploring, and that is, we took our early childhood resource directory and looked at the skeleton, or the structure behind it, and then looked at the specifications, and in all honesty, there isn't that much difference, and that was kind of an encouraging thing. So I would just say at the gut for First Five Alameda County, it's actually a really great exercise to just validate a little bit some of our early thinking about what needs to be part of every resource record. Now, the difference seems to be that our other partner is Eden INR, which is our Alameda County's 211 entity. They have a much different infrastructure. So I think the interesting part about this particular pilot is to balance what Eden INR is doing and looking at where First Five has sort of tackled this resource directory question and sort of matching it up. And so I'm sort of jumping directly into a quick pilot update, but to answer your question, Greg, I actually don't think that it's. I think that it's been validating to see the global specs, and we don't find it all that intimidating at all. I mean, I think what we see is a lot of very familiar concepts that are being played out on the technical side, and so that's been really great for us.
That's good feedback.
Now, I'm almost positive that Eden INR might have a very different perspective, just because they have a much longer history with their resource directories, and I think that they've also wedged themselves a little bit more to a less flexible infrastructure. So part of their conversation is also whether, and I think that they are in active communication or active discussions of whether their infrastructure needs to be wholly upgraded, and I don't think that I can really speak to where they are in that particular process, but it was mentioned.
Yeah. Do you have go on and share some more about the conversation you had with Steve Spiker with Eden9R to give some context to the folks on the call. First Five Alameda collects this information around a subdomain of providers. Eden9R is the 211 system, and Urban Strategies is an organization that does actually a whole lot of different things, of which resource directories is one, but they are probably like the sort of least in the business, so to speak, but also the most active in terms of open data and civic technology. So yeah, share a little bit more about what conversations you all had, what kind of next steps you've identified, and where your questions are, and how you think it might sort of generate feedback that's relevant to the model itself.
Sure. So one of the partners that I neglected to mention was a United Way of the Bay Area. Muncie was actually on the call last Friday as well, and that was also an encouraging sign. I believe they're all on iCarol at this point in time. The rest of the Bay Area 211s, and Eden9R is sort of that stepchild who has for a long time worked off of a single database. So Rick Otto at Eden9R is really rethinking where their technology needs to be in order to fit into this new conversation. But what we discussed last Friday was, and I think that this was definitely Urban Strategies really wanting to accelerate the process. So we actually had from the two-day workshop, Rick and I actually had sort of sketched out a really long-term pilot project, like 18 months, just to get to the point of agreeing to a common container of information. But what Urban Strategies did was to just accelerate the process. Steve Spiker basically said, well, maybe the first steps is to just take a quick scan of where our data actually does cross over. So one is the actual data structure, and see how similar or how different the two data systems are. And then the next step is to look at the content of our resources and identifying whether we are even going to have that much crossover in the types of resources that our two entities have been collecting over time. So that's sort of where we landed. But the conversation was that we really would like to envision a new data source where, and I might not be using the right technical terms, but really a singular container for all the resource information that's floating around in Alameda County, and be it that the first conversation or first concept was for First Five as well as Eden9R to be able to push our information into this single container, and then use that as sort of the singular platform from which all other entities looking for resources could plug and play from. So that's that was the initiating conversation. And then the first steps we identified was really just to take a look at how similar or how different our existing databases look. And a lot of this is hinging on the question of whether Eden is going to shift and which direction they're going to shift in terms of their own technology.
Greg, if I could jump in.
Please.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research projects over the years, I guess going back 12 years now. And the single container has always been the goal, and it will never, I mean, just to make the story short, it'll never happen. There's a lot of reasons that go into that, both technical and social reasons. I shared a paper early on with Greg about the shared point of access, and it talked about different data models, distributed, centralized, and otherwise. And essentially, if you were able to stop the hands on a clock, you could do that. The problem is the clock keeps on ticking, and the environment in which these agencies operate it's constantly changing. And there are the different constituency groups within the different sectors. So if you were to look at the health sector, the school sector, the public social services, private social services, the whole vast array of nonprofits, there simply isn't a way to get that type of single container designed, and that's why I think the move is more toward a schema such that systems can map to some type of shared data, and that's where I think Greg is trying to take things with the API. So the APIs, I mean, for humans, we understand a single container. APIs aren't bothered by not having a single container. They just go on their way, and they look around the web, and they find what they need, and then they bring that data to wherever it needs to be. And my understanding is where it needs to be would be in this resource directory, which doesn't necessarily have to be a single container.
Right. I think that I might have just misuse some of the vocabulary, in that the single container is too concrete of a of a metaphor. I think what I actually meant is really using a common universal schema, and how we get at that information or update that information or have people access the information would be managed outside of that. So.
Now that works a lot better. But you will come across people who they see, somebody that Oracle has this data warehouse, and they'll say, oh, that's what we need to do. We need to put everything in a single data warehouse. And it's like, no, you don't, because it just won't. I mean, researchers can do that because we can stop time and say, as of this date, here is our snapshot. A database administrator can take a snapshot. But when you're talking about resource directory and referrals, that's a real-time application. So yeah, that's we're back on the same page.
Yeah, I think that in the workshop that we had, there was talk about really a system in which you have distributed containers, and they're publishing data in the same language, and that there's some service or some tool or set of tools that take the data that's being published from these different sources and is able to, whether it's sync or just like present the best possible complete version or so on and so forth, or at least enable querying of everything or a particular term across all these different sources and so on, which I think is different from trying to get everyone to use the same database. Which is not to say it's going to be easy, but maybe this is just going to be possible. And actually on that, Jen, I'd like to show them the images that we're working on. Would you be cool if we had them look at the robots?
Sure. I don't have
I have it
a.
in Google Docs, but while I'm pulling it up, folks, I didn't mean to cut off conversation if there are other thoughts about the exchange we just had between Dale and Chris.
Hey, Dale, would you be interested in sharing that whatever research that you sent over to Greg about the shared points of access of information? I think that would be good for us in Alameda County to take a look at, just be of the same mind on it.
Sure. Greg, do you have a way to do that, or?
I mean, Dale, you sent me a lot of papers, so we'll have to figure out which one.
It's the one on the shared point of access.
Okay. Is that SharePoint as in one word or two words?
Two.
Okay.
Let me Chris, if you want to send me your email address, I can email it to you.
Sure thing.
And I'm pretty easy to find. If you just Google Dale Fitch, F-I-T-C-H, I'm the first hit. And the first link has my email address link.
Okay, great. I'll find you.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
it would be great to put in the notes, to include in the notes from this call.
Okay.
And while we're sharing, I think this is relevant. Jen and I have been working on some visualizations that can help us sort of convey some of these concepts. We were working on them specifically for the DC project to be able to sit down with stakeholders and very quickly show them what we're talking about. This is very much a work in progress. It's not even a finished draft. But I want to share it. Take a look, and what we want to get to is actually page 4. See if you can pull it up. Is everybody able to see it? I pasted it in the chat column.
Hey, great. Yeah, I see the link. And I just had a quick question for you. Is there a way in Google Hangouts broadcast to share a document?
Oh, maybe
otherwise?
There is a. Hold on, let me see it. Are you seeing something happening on the Google Hangout screen? I'm trying to.
Yeah, I saw the Use app.
Okay, let me see.
Google Drive. Okay.
Oh wait, let me see.
I see the robots. That's really cute.
Let's see if we can pull it up here. Is everybody seeing it on the Hangout screen?
After I clicked on Google Drive, I see a.
I just tried to pull it up on the Hangout screen here. Is everybody seeing this in the Hangout screen instead of my face talking? We sort of identify. I see it. I don't know if anybody else does.
Oh, are you talking about my documents, my drive?
No, I'm just in the Hangouts page now.
Oh.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, great. So yeah, we're developing a language really to be able to describe the different types of data. So we first start, organization, service, and site. Like that's the sort of the bedrock, and we're trying to be simple without getting into the complexity of program, just to show that these different types of data make up a record. All these different types of all these different records make up a database. And our objective is to develop a common format, a standard format for structuring these records. And this standard format would be a prelude, like that's a necessary first step to be able to enable web services like APIs to effectively be exchanging records between themselves. So, and again, this is just a first draft, but we will be continuing to develop this over time, and hopefully we'll get a tool that will help you all, Chris, in Alameda, sort of have some visual things to talk about to keep things, it gets real easy to lose the thread with folks who don't always have the same technical skill or even the same language to describe the different technical concepts. And this may be helpful.
I agree. I think that would help a lot because it's going to get confusing once you're talking to the resource specialists versus because the resource specialists tend to be a little bit more database oriented. The case managers are just going to focus on service, 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 and we'll talk a lot more though about eligibility and applications. And then you get the case managers, you get the general public. Yeah, I think that's going to be helpful.
So we have a few more minutes. I want to bring us back. We've talked about DC and San Francisco pilots. Bring us back to the issue of like how we're designing this data model, let's say around the point of eligibility, in a way that A, sets our pilots up to do what they need to do, and B, prepares us to learn from what they do so that we can do it better in the future. So in terms of the issue of eligibility, Bread for the City has a set of, Jen, maybe you can speak a little bit about their eligibility, how they handle eligibility. I think Andrew already shared with Sophia like a set of concepts as like a starting point.
I think he did. I have to pull up that email. But are you saying you mean what their eligibility requirements are?
Or how they keep track of that in their current system. Let me see. So Sophia, we got like in an email, Andrew just responds. The things he's thinking about when it comes to eligibility off the top of his head are age, gender, with children, disability, income, and then we got others suggesting homeless, veteran, domestic violence survivor, and they all acknowledge that there are more, right? And so these are sort of like descriptive phrases, and I'm curious, Sophia, about what kind of format or structure are you looking for from our users to sort of set us up for this? Here, I'll share them in the chat box. These are the ones that Bread stakeholders have shared with us so far for eligibility.
And when we talk about eligibility, it's different from what the various community resource is capable of serving. Okay.
Yep. Like who's eligible for this service? That's right. So, I don't know, Chris, do you have a way that you all structure those criteria, those attributes in your system?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that always comes up, and we're trying to figure out whether we need to make it really firm and static or have the ability to have eligibility criteria evolve over time. So one thing is Medi-Cal eligibility. This is California's Medicaid program. So I guess it's associated with income, but now that income threshold sort of shifts a little bit. So depending on which program, they could say it's a certain percentage of federal poverty level, or it's Medi-Cal eligibility, which is slightly different from federal poverty. But then those levels change over time as well, or the organization may get a new grant and be able to serve a wider range of families. I think that income is one piece. The other eligibility component is more, sometimes we have race, ethnicity-based programs. So our Black Infant Health case management services are only eligible for African American families, or they have to live in a certain zip code.
Yep. So Sophia, what are the follow we have a bunch of different eligibility criteria that we're hearing from our users. What process to go forward to actually build this into the model, if at all?
I think what I'm really looking for is a framework on how to describe the different types of eligibility. It's like pretty literal stuff, like whether you want to do it by age, do you want to do it by gender? Are there other, other criteria? Really the enumeration of criteria is what I'm looking for. So just a listing of like the different types of, different types of eligibility. So if somebody is filling out the form, you can do a pull down and say, oh, okay, it's for ages, from ages 0 to 13, or ages, 15 to 21, something like that.
So looking from the list that we have here, we have some that are like, well, they seem easy from one sense, although I'm sure they actually get really hard in terms of age, gender, income, and also like family, I guess we could say, single, with children, married, and then Brett offered a number of others that are like abilities, homelessness, veterans, domestic violence survivors. I mean, I wonder if those could actually extend onwards to be sort of like types of situations. And then there's this other issue of like zip code, which seems actually fairly straightforward. I mean, I know that there are other organizations out there working specifically on this. Aunt Bertha, the Benefits Data Trust, like there are a number of groups that come to mind that are modeling different criteria for eligibility, sort of heterogeneous eligibility criteria into a common model. And so I'm sort of inclined to have an approach here that enables us to point to those models as examples so that people could plug and play. I'm not sure if that actually can work. But let's, it's 1 o'clock, so we can wrap it up. But any final thoughts on how we want to use this last week, or the time in which we're now getting ready to like actually set the model? Anything we want to ask of the work group or each other or our pilot projects in order to actually get what we need to move forward? Final thoughts?
I would say just go ahead and compile the directories, and then reconvene and see how that process went. And then for sure eligibility criteria would be the next thing that would follow from there.
Yeah, and I guess the one comment that I have about the eligibility discussion is to have some start and end date for any of the eligibility criteria, just because we just know that it evolves so much over time in any single resource out there.
Are you saying that we should have a start and end date for our discussion about it, or that we should at the level of the data? At what point was this eligibility criteria set?
It's the data element itself when the eligibility criteria was set and when it sunsets.
Okay. Jen, Sophia, final thoughts?
Nope, just trying to wrap up what we have here and getting on to the data model.
No, I think those suggestions are right on.
Great. All right, thanks everybody. As always, I'm always looking for suggestions for ways to improve this format, to shake it up a little bit. We've done probably the most intense stretch of these calls. We won't be doing this weekly from here on out. We'll probably move back to a bi-weekly or monthly schedule. So I appreciate those of you who've actually hung in there through all the last 3 weeks. We'll be sort of kicking this to the work group over the next few weeks, although I can say that if Dale, Chris, if you all want to be involved at the level of the work group in terms of like making these final decisions and making documentation and that sort of thing, there's space, and in fact we would welcome your involvement. So so we'll be shifting into that mode, and I hope to see you involved. All right.
Cool. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, guys. Nice to meet you guys.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Thanks.
All right.